How many red flags are we willing to ignore in order to not agitate the world around us? How much danger are we prepared to face in hopes of not losing our necessary income? Are we blind to these risks we take every day? Or are we so desperate for money and assurance from others that we become entangled in grave situations, with very little options as a result? Either way, it would seem we have such a loose grasp on the amount of dangers that exist in our world and outside of it, that we might as well be bait, waiting to be dragged, kicking and screaming, into the dark. 2012, Darren, a 26-year-old, was working for an estate sale company based in Orange County. The company was usually hired by people who had lost a loved one, who had accumulated more stuff than the ones left behind knew what to do with. The crew would organize and price all of the items in the residence for a large sale, which customarily took about 4 days to set up. Sometimes the homes they were entering hadn't been disturbed in years, and were filled with items that oftentimes even the family had no idea existed. Darren had been tasked with sleeping at the locations during the setup in order to act as a guard. Many of their clients' homes had been broken into before, either by disgruntled family members or scummy neighbors, but Darren's presence seemed to put a stop to these overnight thefts. Plus, he enjoyed staying at these random lodgings, as it allowed him time away from his roommates. At night, he would walk through the homes and imagine what kind of people lived in these places. He wondered if they were homes filled with love and caring, or institutions of fear and sorrow. That summer, the crew had been contracted to organize a sale in Hollywood, California. When they arrived at the address, they found themselves in a lower-end neighborhood riddled with rundown buildings, and a large number of vagrants holding various degrees of sanity. The heat was so intense, it was like being hit by a wall when they got out of their cars. Most of the buildings were historical, and therefore would cost a great deal to legally restore. This made it virtually impossible for the residents of little means to accomplish any structural rehabilitation. The house they would be organizing was a large 2-story square building, with a sizable courtyard at its center. The architecture of the home was beautiful and ornate, but the years of neglect left the structure stained and crumbling. It was covered in overgrown ivy, and green mold spread across its outer walls. At the front of the home was a tall, sturdy gate, blocking an entrance into the courtyard, kept shut with a lock and chain. As the crew examined the outside of the building, the owner arrived. He was an elderly man who looked to be in his 70s. He led the group to the only door in and out of the residence, located on its side. When they entered the home, the moldy, musty smell in the air swirled around them. Once inside, they found it was even more decayed than the exterior, and the dry desert heat changed to a swampy humidity. Paint was peeling from the walls, and the carpet was almost completely deteriorated, and strange colored stains covered every surface of the first floor. With almost none of the lights and outlets working, and very little windows, the inside was cast in darkness, even during the brightest hours of daylight. This made it nearly impossible to see without your own light source. As they moved through the structure, flashlights in hand, the old man explained that his father bought the building in the 40s, and how they lived there until the 60s, when he turned it into a quadruplex and rented out the other 3 accommodations. In the late 70s, all the tenants left, and only the father remained for a short time. But the old man wasn't clear why they abandoned such a large, promising property. The walls that separated the apartments had been taken down, but the remnants were still visible. The first floor was scattered with miscellaneous items and expensive antique furniture that was in excellent condition. Darren found it odd that the property had decayed so badly, but most of the items inside had been untouched by time. The old man then led him up to the second floor that was almost completely empty except for a few pieces of furniture. It was somehow very cool up there, which was a nice break for the heated workers. Darren and others from the crew moved the furniture down to the first floor, and were then told by the elderly man not to go back up there, as the floor is failing and anyone could fall through at any time. This shocked the crew as they had all just been up there at once, moving heavy items. They locked the doors leading up to the second floor and blocked them off with items they had brought down. They didn't want anyone wandering up there, or someone trying to hide in order to rob them later. At the end of the day, Darren was given the keys and the rest of the crew left. He made himself at home in the one room on the entire property with working lights. While watching a movie on his tablet, he noticed he had left his cigarettes in his car. He walked outside, grabbed them, and returned to the movie. A short time later, Darren would see a bright light coming from the courtyard. He put down his tablet, walked over to a small window, and saw it was some sort of spotlight. He opened a door to the courtyard and poked his head out to see a police helicopter hovering above. Thinking they could be hunting someone dangerous, he hurried inside and closed the door. Possible reasons for police presence raced through his mind. Suddenly there was a banging on the building, coming from all sides. Darren was beginning to panic when he heard, "We know you're in there. Come outside with your hands on your head." While shaking in fear, Darren walked back out into the courtyard. He stared up at the helicopter, almost mesmerized by the light, until he was jolted back into reality. "Hey, put your hands on your damn head!" An officer yelled from the outside of the chained gate. Darren abided by the officer's wishes, and then slowly walked up to the gate. The officers told him how a neighbor saw him break into the property. Darren then explained why he was there, and after a few questions about antiques, the officers left, but not before making a note that the once-thought abandoned building would have a temporary occupant. The next day went on as normal. They brought in the rest of their equipment and placed it all in an empty, designated room. Darren entertained the crew with his story of the police and even joked, "Watch now, somebody's really going to try to break in. The cops will think it's just me." That night was mostly uneventful, except for a few strange noises coming from different areas of the house. Feeling safe in the house that he triple-checked was locked, he would interpret these sounds as the old foundation and frame of the home shifting and creaking. But what he found the next morning would leave him confused and terrified. The following day, when he entered the room with all the company equipment, he found that their 25 6-foot-long plastic tables were not there. Positive that one of the crew got there early, he began to hunt for them inside. The tables were heavy and awkward to move through the small doorways of the old building. Darren thought about how hard it would be to move them all so quietly. Darren would find no one, but eventually he would find the tables. They were on the opposite side of the building, but still there was no sign of anyone. As far as he knew, he was alone. When the crew arrived, Darren told them what happened, but none of them believed him. They thought he was trying to play a prank on them. Things only became more puzzling for Darren when different members of the crew would confront him about moving or hiding stuff for his little prank. He swore it wasn't him, but again, they didn't believe him. Darren was now a little apprehensive about staying in the house by himself, but the crew didn't accept his story, and he couldn't afford to forego the money he'd make watching over the property, so he decided to tough it out. That night around 3 a.m., Darren was on his way to the only working bathroom in the decrepit home when he noticed the jagged broken mirror propped up against the wall at the end of the long hallway. Until that night, it had been covered with a heavy blanket, and Darren remembered securing it before the crew left for the day. As he cautiously crept closer and closer, Darren realized the light from his flashlight wasn't reflecting in the mirror. Bewildered by this mysterious effect, he waved the light around, but still no reflection or shadow appeared. The light was cast on the walls around it, but the mirror itself was a black void. He then turned the flashlight off and back on quickly, and suddenly the light showed itself in the reflection. Darren was now quite scared and baffled. but he kept telling himself, it's all in his head. Pushed himself to move into the bathroom and sat down. Put down the flashlight facing straight up so as to light up the whole room. The bathroom was still sprinkled with miscellaneous items, along with another smaller dirty mirror leaning against some boxes. Darren was gazing into the mirror when he saw a strange shape next to his reflection. He strained to focus his eyes on the muddled mirror and leaned forward to see a human-shaped figure. It was standing less than an inch from him. He held out in shock and turned to see nothing there. He looked back to the mirror to find that the dark figure had vanished. Darren sat in the bathroom for a moment, unable to move. His heart was pummeling his chest with each beat. He wanted to stand and run into the only lit room, but could not feel his feet. After a few moments of frozen perturbation, he stood up, collected himself, and quickly but quietly moved into the lit room. He spent the rest of the night wide awake, waiting for something else to happen. When the morning finally came, Darren decided he wouldn't tell the others about this event. If they didn't believe him before, they definitely wouldn't believe him now. He wasn't sure what was happening in the house and was terrified of the possibilities, but knew there was only one night left and he still needed the money. If he were to say anything to the owners, they would just laugh and hang up on him. That day, Darren was very quiet and reserved, which the others noticed right away. When they asked him what was wrong, he just told them he was tired because the couch he was sleeping on was uncomfortable. He knew telling them what had happened wouldn't change anything, and beside that, he couldn't stop thinking about the night to come. On the last night, Darren waited, awake and alert. He attempted to watch movies, but couldn't alter his focus from what could possibly come out of the dark. Every once in a while, he would pause what he was watching and sit in silence, listening for any sign of intruders or the unknown. The night was quiet, and Darren thought he might be overreacting until about 2 a.m., when the silence was suddenly broken. It started with the sounds of people talking coming from the second floor. Then pounding footsteps were heard running back and forth above his head. Darren's breathing quickened, and his heart rate spiked. "There can't be anybody up there. We blocked it all off," he said out loud. The steps got louder and louder, along with the sounds of conversation. Darren attempted to make out what was being said, but it was too muffled. He followed the movement of the steps with his eyes, and they seemed to be running back and forth, faster and faster. Darren felt as if the rest of the world fell away. All he could think about was the sounds getting more and more intense above him. Had a group of people somehow gained entry to the second floor? Suddenly the steps stopped for a moment, then started again, but this time moving towards the stairs leading to the room Darren was in. He followed the steps with fearful anticipation as they got closer to the stairs. Again, they abruptly stopped. Darren leered at the door that opened to the stairway, his heart still pounding, when the door was hit by something heavy, shaking its hinges and sending a loud, chilling echo through the pitch-black structure. Darren stayed staring at the door for what felt like hours. He was afraid to move. The potential that what he'd been seeing and hearing before could be real sent him into a still panic. He could feel his pulse shake his whole body, with each pump of his heart. His short and shallow breaths were now the only audible noise. Darren sat there nervously guarding the door until he was sure that there was no more sound emanating from above him or behind the door. After telling himself over and over he was being a coward, grabbed his knife from his bag and gradually moved towards the stairway entrance. He then moved the couch and boxes blocking the door out of the way, which took some effort to do by himself. Darren squeezed the knife tight in one hand and grabbed the doorknob with the other. Turning the knob, he opened the door a crack and peeked through, but could see nothing. Darren mustered his bravery, held up the knife, and swung the door open. He jumped back at the sight of something blocking the doorway. It was one of their large plastic tables, barely leaning against the doorframe, standing straight up. Darren was once again at a loss. How could this table have gotten there when they had blocked all the second-floor entryways on the first day? Addled by the strange and unexplainable events, and knowing how weak the floor was, he thought it best not to investigate upstairs. The possible dangers awaiting him there, he told himself, were not worth confronting. Darren resecured the door, replaced its barriers, double-checked the makeshift barricades and other entrances. The night was long but silent from then on, but he still would receive no rest. The following day, the sale ended, the crew loaded up, and the home was cleared, leaving nothing left inside the structure. Darren was looking forward to getting out of the nightmare house and back to his own home, but would not tell the rest of the group why he was in such a rush to vacate. As he pulled away in his truck, he felt as if a weight had been lifted from his back, but was still hovering above him. The looming uncertainty followed him home, like a dark, ominous cloud. Who or what moved the tables so sneakily to the other side of the property? Why couldn't he see the light in the serrated mirror's reflection, but could see the illumination all around it? What could the voices and running footsteps have been, and what was in the bathroom? How did the table get behind the door, let alone slam into it with such force? Could there have been someone hiding somewhere on the property, messing with the crew and terrorizing Darren? If so, he would have been in extreme danger by simply explaining it away and not alerting the authorities. Is it possible the crew members were playing a long, sick joke on him, using their precious free time to play an elaborate and difficult prank? Was he just seeing things in the odd hours of the night, when he was fatigued and more susceptible to hallucinations? Or could all these incidents be related to something far beyond our current understanding? Might it be feasible that Darren witnessed something past our own dimension or reality, leaving these seemingly chaotic occurrences to appear sinister because of their supernatural origins? Was this young man somehow connected to an alternate state of existence that we couldn't start to apprehend? Until now, Darren had never told anyone about his experiences in the Hollywood mansion. It is accepted he may never receive an explanation to the questions he holds, but will always remember the chaotic happenings in the dark, crumbling structure and wonder what was watching him from the shadowy void. What lurks in the darkness just beyond our view? Have you caught a glimpse of a malevolent force? Let us tell your story.
Subscribe to Black Letters for a new horror story every 13 days.